please welcome to Field Notes, Cindy Snow.
You see that mark right there? That's where the chickens pecked me. They didn't want me messing with their eggs. That was my father talking. He liked to tell snippets of stories from his childhood when we'd work together in the kitchen. The hen house, the corn he grew in a neighbor's field and sold at the local A&P. How he helped his mother in the kitchen chop vegetables. About 9 years ago, my father was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And for a long time, he spent half the week with my sister and her family, and half the week with me and my family, so we could share taking care of him. We shared him. We also shared a big, honking food dehydrator. It was the size of a mini refrigerator, 12 racks, a huge fan in the back. It probably dates at least from the early 1970s. It was my mother's. My father and I would go to Apex Orchards, which is near where we live, and he'd carry out to the car a huge bag of apples, the seconds, put it in the trunk. He'd complain, of course. "Oh, that was heavy," or "I gotta get the feeling back in my fingers." But he also had this look on his face of pride, like he knew he was doing something helpful, and he was. We'd get home and I'd set up the whole counter with everything you need to process the apples, a big bowl for the cores, a bowl for the peels, a bowl for the pieces that fell apart that we'd later turn into apple cobbler. I'd set him up at the counter on a stool with all the racks in front of him and a big bowl to his left for all the rings. And I'd clamp at the end of the counter the apple processor. Now, I bet some of you have used one of these. They look like a mini medieval torture device. Lots of metal, lots of gears, and 3 long prongs that are super pointy that you jam the apple on top of and then crank, 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 crank. And what you get looks like an apple slinky. One slice down the side and lovely apple rings fall out. I'd pile up the bowl beside my father, and he'd take them one at a time and place them on the racks. I'd bring the racks over to the dehydrator and fill it up. And we worked like that. It was fun. For a number of years, a number of apple seasons. But people with Alzheimer's don't get better. They only get worse. And after a while, he just started doing weird things with the apples. Like, I'd set everything up on the counter, and he'd just sit there and eat them. Or, and I didn't discover this till later, he'd slide them in his pants pockets. And then sometimes he'd stack them up on the rack like cairns, like we needed guideposts to get to the top of Mount Washington. Still, we got the apples dried. Maybe it took twice as long as it used to, but that didn't really matter. It was still something we could do together. And that went on for a few more years, a few more apple seasons. But eventually it became clear that my father couldn't help with the apple drying process anymore. And so I'd set him up in the corner of the kitchen beside the window on a very overstuffed glider rocker, and he could watch me do the whole process. But he had to interject. If I was cranking out the apples, he'd say, "Whoa, watch out, you're going too fast." Or when I sliced down the side of that apple slinky, he'd say, "Watch out, you're gonna cut yourself." but he always liked the apple cobbler at the end of the process. And again, we went on like that for a few years. But at a certain point, my sister and I knew we could no longer take care of him at home. He'd started to think that the flat surfaces in his bedroom were toilets, and he started to get angry and bolt out of the house at any time of the day or night. One time, he booked it out of the house. He was surprisingly fast, and my husband had to jump in the car and follow him down the road. And then my husband leaned out the car window and said, "Hey, buddy, you need a ride?" And my father said, "Yeah, it's a long way to Boston." I mean, he hadn't lived in Boston for years. He hadn't known us for years, but that didn't really matter. That was the least of our problems. And so we decided it was time to send him to a nursing home, which was painful for him and painful for us. But we didn't really have a choice. And that next fall, at apple season, I just didn't have any interest in drying apples. I'd done it for years. I had brought them to work, to potlucks, sent them to family. But that fall, when the idea of drying apples came up, all I could think about was what had been lost. And then Christmas came, and my youngest sister, who lives in Florida, let me know that when her son, my teenage nephew, opened up the Christmas package I'd sent, he said, "Are there any dried apples?" And of course, there weren't any. So I decided right then to get to work. I went to the orchard. I brought back a big bag of Honeycrisp. I processed them, and I sent a nice bag of dried apples to my nephew. Thank you.
CISA is so honored to bring you these stories about local food and our culture. If you'd like to learn more about CISA's work and our programs, please go to buylocalfood.org. Thank you.